The wrath of the gods is a terrifying force to behold. When King Tullus Hostilius, the third king of Rome, attempted to perform secret, sacred rites with a heart full of arrogance rather than piety, the heavens answered with fire. A bolt of lightning struck the royal palace, and the great warrior king was burned to ashes. Rome was plunged once again into the silent uncertainty of an interregnum. The city had experienced the mystic peace of Numa Pompilius and the brutal, destructive energy of Tullus Hostilius. Now, the Roman people needed a leader who could balance the sword and the altar. They needed a man who understood that a civilization cannot survive on endless warfare, nor can it protect itself with prayers alone. In this episode, we will witness the birth of the just war, the expansion of Rome to the sea, and the arrival of a wealthy, ambitious stranger from Etruria, whose dynasty would forever change the face of the Roman world.
Chapter 1. The grandson of Numa. Upon the death of Tullus, the administration of the city devolved once more upon the Senate, who nominated an interrex. When the assembly of the people was held, they elected a man named Ancus Marcius to be their king, and the fathers of the Senate confirmed the choice. Ancus Marcius was no stranger to the legacy of Roman leadership. He was the grandson of the revered king Numa Pompilius by his daughter. As soon as he ascended the throne, Ancus reflected on the profound renown of his grandfather. He realized that the previous reign, though glorious in its military achievements, had been fundamentally flawed because the rites of religion had been either utterly neglected or improperly performed. Deeming it of the highest importance to restore the public ceremonies exactly as they had been instituted by Numa, Ancus ordered the pontiffs to transcribe all the religious directives from the king's commentaries onto white tables and to expose them to public view. This sudden return to piety sent a ripple across Latium. His own subjects, weary of conflict, were desirous of peace, and the neighboring nations entertained a hope that the new king would conform entirely to the pacifist conduct of his grandfather. The Latins, with whom a treaty had been concluded during the reign of Tullus, assumed new courage. They made an incursion upon Roman lands, and when the Romans demanded restitution, the Latins returned a contemptuous answer, fully supposing that the Roman king would spend his reign in indolence among chapels and altars. But they had misjudged him. The genius of Ancus Marcius was of a middle kind. He partook of the nature of both Numa and Romulus. He recognized that while peace was necessary for his grandfather's uncivilized people, his own patience was now being tried, and because it was tried, it was being despised. The times, he realized, were more suited to a King Tullus than to a King Numa. Chapter 2. The Invention of the Just War. Ancus Marcius was prepared to fight, but he refused to wage war like a barbarian. He believed that just as Numa had instituted religious rites for times of peace, there must be sacred ceremonies relating to war, ensuring that conflicts were not merely waged, but formally and religiously proclaimed. To this end, he borrowed a highly formalized ritual from an ancient nation called the Aquicoli, creating the order of the Fetials, or heralds. The ritual was highly specific and deeply atmospheric. When a Roman ambassador came to the frontiers of a people from whom satisfaction was demanded, he would cover his head with a woolen fillet. Standing at the border, he would declare, "Hear, O Jupiter, hear ye confines, let justice hear. I am a public messenger of the Roman people. I come justly and religiously deputed, and let my words gain credit." He would then make his demands and utter a solemn curse, praying that if he unjustly or impiously demanded those persons or goods, Jupiter should never permit him to enjoy his native country. This haunting declaration was repeated when he crossed the frontier, when he met the first man on the road, upon entering the city gates, and upon entering the foreign forum. If the demands were not met after 33 days, the herald would call upon Jupiter, Juno, Romulus, and all the gods of heaven, earth, and the underworld to witness that the foreign nation was unjust. Returning to Rome, the king would consult the Senate. If the majority agreed, the war was officially resolved upon. The official priest would then carry a javelin pointed with steel or burnt at the end and dipped in blood to the enemy's confines. In the presence of at least 3 grown men, he would declare war on behalf of the Roman people and hurl the blood-dipped spear across the boundary. This formalized the concept of a just war, a principle that posterity adopted and that would justify Roman conquests for centuries to come. Chapter 3: The Expansion of Rome. Having satisfied the gods, Ancus set out with a newly levied army. He took the Latin city of Politorium by storm. Following the example of former kings who had increased the Roman state by taking enemies into the number of citizens, Ancus transplanted the entire population of Politorium to Rome. Because the older hills were already occupied, the Sabines holding the capital and citadel, the Albans on the Caelian Mount, and the old Romans around the Palatium, Ancus assigned the Aventine Hill to this new multitude. When the ancient Latins later reoccupied the vacated Politorium, Ancus took it a second time and utterly demolished it, ensuring it could never again serve as a receptacle for the enemy. The war culminated at Medulia, a well-fortified town with a strong garrison. After a bitter series of engagements in the open fields, Ancus made a massive effort with all his forces, achieved a complete victory, and returned to Rome with immense booty. Thousands more Latins were admitted into the city and settled near the Temple of Murcia to join the Aventine to the Palatium. Ancus was not merely a conqueror, he was a master builder. He added the Janiculum Hill to the city, not for want of room, but to prevent it from ever becoming a stronghold for an enemy force. To connect this new hill to Rome, he constructed the Pons Sublicius, a wooden bridge that was the first ever built across the Tiber River. He dug the Fossa Quiritium to defend the low grounds, and noting the growing licentiousness and clandestine crimes amid such a massive, blended population, he built a formidable prison in the heart of the city, overlooking the Forum, to intimidate wrongdoers. His vision extended far beyond the city walls. Ancus took the Maesian forest from the Vientes, extending the Roman dominion all the way to the sea. There, at the mouth of the Tiber, he founded the port city of Ostia and formed salt pits around it. To commemorate his distinguished military successes, he enlarged the ancient temple of Jupiter Feretrius. After a reign of 24 years, equal to any of his predecessors in the arts of peace and war, Ancus Marcius died. Chapter 4: The Ambitious Stranger. While Ancus Marcius was transforming Rome, a quiet revolution was taking place within its social elite. During his reign, a remarkably wealthy and enterprising man named Lucumo came to settle in Rome. Lucumo was not a Roman, nor even an Italian. He was the son of Demaratus, a Corinthian who had fled his native country due to sedition and settled in the Etruscan city of Tarquini. Demaratus had married there and had 2 sons, Lucumo and Arens. When his father and brother died, Lucumo inherited the entirety of his father's vast wealth. Lucumo married an Etruscan woman named Tanaquil. Tanaquil was descended from a very high family and possessed a fiercely ambitious spirit. She could not brook the idea that the condition into which she had married was inferior to that in which she had been born. Because Lucumo was the son of a foreign exile, the native Etruscans despised him. Unable to bear this affront, Tanaquil persuaded her husband to leave Tarquini, regardless of her love for her native country, so long as she could see her husband advanced to honors. Rome seemed the perfect destination. In a newly founded state where all nobility was recent and based on merit, there would be room for a man of courage and immense wealth. Tanaquil reminded her husband that Titus the Sabine had been king, that Numa had been sent for from Cures, and that Ancus himself was born of a Sabine mother. They packed their effects and rode toward Rome in a chariot. As they reached the Janiculum Hill, a bizarre and highly symbolic event occurred. An eagle, suspended on its wings, gently stooped down and lifted the cap right off Lucumo's head. The great bird flew around the chariot with loud screams, and then, as if sent from heaven for the express purpose, orderly replaced the cap on his head before flying aloft into the sky. Tanaquil, a woman well skilled in celestial prodigies as Etruscans generally are, received this omen with boundless joy. Embracing her husband, she bade him hope for a high and elevated fortune, explaining that the bird had come from a sacred quarter of the heavens, acting as a messenger of the gods to lift the ornament from a mortal's head, only to restore it by divine direction. Chapter 5. The First Usurpation. Entering the city with these lofty hopes, they purchased a house, and Lucumo gave out his new Roman name, Lucius Tarquinius Priscus. His vast wealth and his status as a stranger immediately caused him to be noticed by the Romans. Tarquin played his hand masterfully. He promoted his fortune by his affable address, courteous invitations, and endless acts of kindness. Eventually, the report of this magnificent nobleman reached the palace. Tarquin paid court to King Ancus with such politeness and address that he soon became an intimate friend, present at all public and private deliberations. He proved himself so trustworthy that, upon his deathbed, King Ancus appointed Tarquin as the guardian to his own children. But Tarquin's ambition, fueled by Tanaquil, had no limits. When Ancus died, his sons were nearing the age of puberty. Sensing the urgency, Tarquin pressed for the assembly for the election of a new king to be held as soon as possible. On the day the assembly was proclaimed, he deliberately sent the young sons of Ancus away on a hunting trip. With the rightful heirs absent, Tarquin became the first man in Roman history to actively and earnestly sue for the crown. He delivered a calculated, persuasive speech to the people, arguing that he was not attempting anything unprecedented. He reminded them that he was the third foreigner to aspire to the sovereignty, pointing out that Titus was an enemy alien and Numa had been voluntarily invited. He emphasized that he had spent the prime of his life in Rome, had learned the Roman laws under King Ancus himself, and had vied with everyone in his bounty and generosity. The people, swayed by his rhetoric and his undeniable wealth, elected him king by a great majority. Chapter 6. The Builder King and the Miracle of the Razor. Once on the throne, Tarquin proved to be as shrewd a politician as he was an ambitious candidate. To strengthen his own power against potential rivals, he elected 100 new men into the Senate. These new senators were called the Minorum Gentium, the younger families, and they formed a fiercely loyal political bloc whose elevation to power was owed entirely to the king's favor. Tarquin then sought military glory. He waged war against the Latins, taking the wealthy town of Appioli by storm. He returned to Rome with more booty than the character of the war would suggest, and used this wealth to celebrate games with unprecedented cost and magnificence. He marked out the space for what is now called the Circus Maximus. Spaces were parted off for senators and knights to build their own benches, known as forae, and they viewed the games from scaffolding 12 feet high. He brought in horses and boxers from Etruria, establishing solemn annual games that would be known as the Roman or Great Games. He also portioned off spaces round the forum for private individuals to build upon, erecting porticos and shops. His grand plans to surround the city with a stone wall were suddenly interrupted by a massive Sabine invasion. The attack was so sudden that the enemy crossed the Anio River before the Roman army could meet them, causing great alarm in the city. After a bloody but indecisive first battle, Tarquin realized his army was fatally weak in cavalry. He determined to add new sentries to the Romnensis, Titiensis, and Luceris, the equestrian orders appointed by Romulus, and intended to name them after himself. However, he was opposed by Atus Navius, a highly celebrated soothsayer, who insisted that because Romulus had established the original sentries by augury, no alteration could be made unless the birds approved of it. The king, enraged and wishing to ridicule the art of divination, challenged the augur. "Come, thou diviner, tell me whether what I am thinking on can be done or not." Atus Navius took the auspices, consulted the divine signs, and firmly affirmed that the king's thought could indeed be accomplished. Tarquin sneered and produced a whetstone and a razor. "I was thinking," the king said, "whether you could cut asunder this whetstone with a razor. Take it and perform what thy birds portend may be done." According to the legend, Atus Navius took the razor and immediately sliced the heavy stone completely in two. The king was astounded. A statue of Atus with his head veiled was erected on the steps of the Senate House where the miracle occurred, and the severed whetstone was deposited there as a monument for posterity. From that day forward, the honor of augury was held in such absolute reverence that no public assembly, no summoning of armies, and no affair of importance was ever undertaken without first consulting the birds. Tarquin abandoned his plan to create new sentries with his own name, and instead simply doubled the number of men in the existing corps, creating a force of 1,800 knights. With this reinforced cavalry, Tarquin met the Sabines a second time. Using brilliant tactical sabotage, he sent a great quantity of blazing timber down the Anio River on rafts. The burning logs became firmly impacted against the piers of the Sabine bridge, setting it entirely on fire. The destruction of the bridge struck terror into the Sabines during the battle and cut off their retreat. When the Roman cavalry charged the flanks, the Sabine infantry was routed. Many who escaped the Roman swords drowned in the river, their floating arms carrying the news of victory to Rome before the messengers even arrived. Tarquin stripped the Sabines of their lands, taking the territory of Calatia and leaving his nephew Egerius as its garrison commander. Having subdued the Latins and Sabines, Tarquin returned to his massive public works. He drained the swampy valleys between the hills by constructing a vast network of sewers sloping downward into the Tiber. Furthermore, he leveled a massive area on the Capitoline Hill to lay the foundations for a grand temple to Jupiter, an edifice his mind presaged would match the future grandeur of the empire. Chapter 7. The Boy with the Flaming Head. Yet even as King Tarquin built his legacy in stone, the gods were preparing a different kind of monument within the walls of his own palace. One night, a profound and terrifying prodigy occurred. A young boy named Servius Tullius was fast asleep in the royal quarters. Suddenly, in the sight of many witnesses, the boy's head burst into a brilliant blaze of fire. The royal family was awakened by the great noise and confusion caused by this miraculous phenomenon. A panicked servant rushed forward with water to extinguish the flames, but Queen Tanaquil, ever the reader of celestial signs, physically held the servant back. She forbade anyone to disturb the boy until he awoke of his own accord. The moment the child opened his eyes, the flames vanished into the air. Tanaquil pulled her husband into a private room. "Do you observe this boy whom we bring up in so mean a style?" she asked the king. "Be assured that hereafter he will be a light to us in our adversity and a protector to our palace in distress." She urged Tarquin to train the youth with all possible care, for he was destined to become a great ornament both publicly and privately. From that moment on, the boy whose head had burned with divine fire was treated not as a servant, but as their own son, instructed in the high arts required to maintain royal rank. This boy, born in the shadows of slavery or capture, was marked by the heavens. And as we will see in our next episode, the celestial flame that rested upon his brow would eventually ignite the greatest reforms and the most devastating familial treachery in the history of the Roman monarchy.